Well, Mr. Solfvin, thank you so much for being our guest today on the show. We're honored to have you here. And of course, we've worked with you in the past with The Haunting on Dice Road and really exploring the Pomeranian farmhouse case. And we know you've done a lot of different things in your career. For the people that are watching this right now, maybe let them know your background and how you have come to do this work, this research.
Well, I have a long career, so I won't go into all the details. Let's see, I was born in... No, we won't start there. We'll start with the military. When I was in the military, I had I was a meteorologist in the Air Force, and I happened to pick up a book. I had a free day when my furniture was being moved from one base to another. And so I just walked over to the nearest drugstore in my new location, and I swung the book rack around, and I picked out something that the title interested me. It was called Venture Inward, and it turned out to be about Edgar Casey, a medium from Virginia Beach. And I stayed up all night. I couldn't believe what I was reading. So I said, gee, this is fascinating. So I read another one. I went back the next day, got more books on Edgar Casey. I started touching base with other people who had read about him. And then I stumbled on a scientific literature that was studying things that Edgar Casey did, but from a scientific perspective. Now, I was a scientist. I was a mathematician, my undergraduate degree, and my master's degree was in engineering, meteorology, and so I was familiar with research methodology, and I considered myself a scientist. So it appealed to me that there was a field of study that was devoted to this, that was using scientific methodology to look into these things. So that's my how I get involved with it. So shortly after, just before I was ready to completing my military service, I took a couple weeks leave, and I drove down to Durham, North Carolina, where Duke University is. And I banged on the door, literally, of J.B. Ryan and his associates at Duke. And I said, hey, my name is, and I want to do what you do. So he said, no, you don't. You better think twice about that. It's not a very profitable career. And I said, I don't care. And so the next was history. I just get involved. He said, well, if you really would be interested in this in the future, then I would recommend you consider getting more training in the human sciences, such as psychology, with human subjects, doing research with human subjects. In addition to supplement your mathematics and your engineering background. And so I did.
And why do you think that was important to Mr. Ryan? I mean, why do you think he suggested that you get involved in the psychology and the human element?
He himself was a biologist. He had a PhD in biology when he was called to service in parapsychology. In a way not unlike the way I was called. And he came to Duke University and co-founded the Department of Parapsychology within the psychology department. So he had personal experience of being a scientist, a biologist, and working with human beings on a psychological level. And so that was one of the reasons that he told me that. His personal experience said, well, I really needed that. He really needed to be involved with psychology and know what the studies of psychology were saying about working with people and know the methods of psychology, which are different than the methods of meteorology or the research methods of biology, too.
For people that are watching this and listening, the term parapsychology isn't really used as often today. So can you explain what parapsychology is and what a parapsychologist does?
That's an excellent question because, in fact, you're right. There's a vagueness about what is parapsychology, and many people ask me that if I tell them I have been involved with parapsychology. For me, the answer is pretty simple, and that is parapsychology is a science that studies a set of phenomena that do not have a known physical, normal explanation. So it's sometimes called the science of the paranormal or the science of the anomalous effects. I like to call it the science, and this is a more recent term, exceptional human experiences, or EHEs. And that is a broad term that describes many, many different experiences that people report having that have life impactful impact on them. That is, that it changes the way they view themselves in the world. For example, people who have an experience with a near-death experience, which we hear about a lot these days. One of the amazing things about those near-death experiences is that the people who have them are changed fundamentally, deeply changed in the way they view their own life, their own death. I've had friends who have had near-death experiences, and they say, after that, I no longer fear death because I know what it's like. There are other experiences like that, one called a mystical experience, where one feels the sense of connection with all living things. It's a momentary experience, doesn't last for very long, a few minutes, if you're lucky, an hour. And that kind of experience is hard to describe. It's ineffable. We don't have the words to say what it means. But it has a powerful impact on the person who suddenly, and for the rest of their lives, sees themselves differently in connection with all other living things, including plants and animals, and air, the earth, and the universe. So those are a couple of examples. There are many experiences like that. One of my friends, researchers, wrote a list of over 100 different kinds of experiences like that. Some are the experiences, what we call telepathy, mental telepathy. Most people have heard of that and have some idea what that means. It means mind-to-mind communication. That is, sometimes when you have a synchrony with another person, could be a family member who's in a distant place, and suddenly you get a thought and you know that they need to be in contact. So you try to reach them, and they were trying to reach you. And it kind of confirms something. And there's a feeling that goes along with that. There's information. It's an interesting experience from a scientific point of view because, well, how does that happen? And there are many others, some we call precognition, which is having some sort of idea about the future. Something's going to happen in the future. And it does. It comes to pass. And that creates this feeling that you've stepped into another dimension for a moment. There's also this experience of psychokinesis, which has been studied in the laboratory, where people have the ability to affect matter with their minds. Now, this is usually tested with the roll of dice or various mechanical processes like that, which are easy to investigate, easy to create in a laboratory. So when you roll the dice and you're hoping for a 7, does it really have an impact on the dice? Well, the answer is it may. we have studies over and over that show, yes, people have an impact. The impact is so small that you're not going to win your fortune at Las Vegas by rolling dices and wanting mentally to come out sevens. But there is an effect. And from a scientific point of view, that's the important thing, because how does that effect occur? How can mind have an effect on matter in that direct way? These are just a few examples of many, many kinds of experiences. Another one is déjà vu. People have the experience when they are traveling. They'll go to a store, a little grocery store. They've never been in there before. But when they go in, they suddenly are taken by a feeling, I've been here before. I recognize this. I know this. I know this place. I know this spot, etc. So these kinds of feelings all go into the general category of EHE, exceptional human experience. And in that respect, one of the very common kinds of exceptional human experience is people reporting that they either see or feel or experience in some way a ghost or a haunting in their house. So these are the sorts of things that parapsychologists investigate. Sometimes journalists have talked about parapsychologists as studying things that go bump in the night.
Do you think that's because it's such a broad scope? I mean, when people say I'm experiencing a haunting or my home is haunted or this house is haunted, there's so many different things. I mean, we see a lot of similar hallmarks, a lot of the shuffling sounds, knocking, doors opening, closing, but there's also a lot of other variations. So it seems like it would be hard, I guess, scientifically to try to develop an overall pattern to what's happening. And I guess without the emerging pattern, you can't really hone in on the research.
Right. That's correct. And one of the unfortunate things is the way the human mind is made. We now understand. I'm going to step back a little bit, Steve. I'm getting to your question,
sure,
because it's really a good one. But in order to get to it, I think the listeners need to understand a little bit about the state-of-the-art science of the mind. One of the things we now understand in psychology, which we didn't before, that when I, as a person, look out at the world with my five senses, I'm not seeing the world. In other words, none of my sensory processes are directly touching anything like a real world out there. Now, to explain that, all of my tactile, my auditory, my visual, my taste, all of the ways that I touch the world, I don't touch the world. It's just my sensor is sending a little electrical signal to my brain. So my brain never sees the world, but my brain creates the world that it wants to create based on a variety of memories of previous experiences and a buildup of a story. In other words, I have a story that started when I was born, maybe before, and the story is built up, and the story is a kind of a network. Indra's net, they say in India, of experiences that built up and they keep getting added to as I grow. And I have different experiences and some are painful, some are pleasurable. And so I seek out the ones that are pleasurable and avoid the painful ones. And I create an image, and it seems to me like, whoa, that's the world. But it's not. It's my mind's version of the world. So psychologists now finally have come to the conclusion that our sensory processes are very, very poor. As a matter of fact, the question in psychology, state-of-the-art psychology, is how on earth can we operate in this world with such poor apparatus? When we look out and we think we see something, we're not. It's our mind, our brain, that's creating an image of something and feeding it back to us. But all it has is a few little electrical impulses that are given to it from the eyeball. So you get my point. I don't want to belabor this, but to me, this is wonderful. We now understand something that we didn't understand. We had it totally wrong. We thought there was a real world out there. Well, there is and there isn't, is the current state-of-the-art psychology. There is and there isn't. There's something out there, but our brain will never see it, but our brain creates it. And so that's why we are subject to optical illusions. Everybody knows about optical illusions, but you probably don't know how often in your life, every day, you encounter them. You see things that aren't there, or you don't see things that are there. You feel things that are not there. You miss things that are there, etc. And it goes for all of our sensory processes have optical illusions associated with them. So what I'm getting to is this. That changes the science of human reporting, but we do the best we can. And that's what scientific methodology is all about. Scientific methodology is to eliminate the scientist from the data.
There's got to be a lot of self-discipline. I mean, just being aware of that when you go into a home or you're investigating a situation or a subject, you're consciously trying to detach any of those preconceived notions or whatever they might be. And also, your peers probably play a great role in that because, you know, they're looking at it objectively in every single way. So what you might have brought into it, this person or this peer or this fellow scientist would not have those same things. So it's the data and the research of the data to help filter that.
That's right. That's right. That's one of the reasons that we do peer-reviewed journals and that we publish in peer-reviewed journals. Because when I come up with some findings and I want to publish them, I could write a book, or I could publish in numerous magazines and publications. And there's a lot of sensational stuff. There's a lot of stuff of general interest to the public. But I'm safer to go with a peer-reviewed journal because I have other eyes looking at it. And before it gets into print,
right,
they say, hey, wait a minute, do you really mean this? Do you know this is in conflict with what you said before? This is so there's a filtering process that happens with the peer-reviewed journal. So that's just one example of how scientific methodology, including the peer-reviewed journals, has a correction system built into it to correct for us, to prevent us from making mistakes because of our basic nature as human beings, that we all think we're right and that we all think that we are connected or seeing. So there's this old saying, seeing is believing. Nothing could be further from the truth. There have been numerous studies of witness accounts, and you put 3 people on the corner of a street, and then you stage an accident, have 2 cars come by and stage an accident, and then you interview the 3 people. You get 3 different stories. That guy did it. No, it's his fault. Yeah, well, it was both of them. He had he was on his he was texting. No, he wasn't texting, but that's how your mind thinks. He must have been texting because why did he hit the other car, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Our mind is so powerful, and maybe that's the bottom line of the story. Our mind is so powerful that it creates these things, but that's exactly what I'm trying to study. And that's kind of an interesting paradox. And I sometimes wonder if it's possible for me or anybody else to break through that and to be able to look and see something and really see it. Now, I have some examples of that, but they're from Eastern religion. They're from meditators. They're from people who have sat on a mountain for 15 years. They've been able to clear their mind to the point where they can actually see reality.
How do they describe reality after being in an isolated region for 15 years in a mountain? What's their perception?
Right, exactly. Good point. And good, very good question. I'm not sure I could put it in words, but I have a few examples. One example comes from the Buddha himself. Is a teaching story from Buddhism that I'm not a Buddhist myself, but I'm fascinated by Buddhist philosophy. But there's this teaching story that says a lot. The Buddha was very concerned about people and had lots of questions about life and what makes life and what's right and what's wrong, all of this. So he had an experience, or so the story goes, of actually going to a river and meditating by the river. And as he was meditating by the river, and when I say meditating, when the Buddha meditated, he sat there for a week. It's not like, okay, I'm going to meditate for 20 minutes. He went into a very deep meditation, and when he looked up from that deep meditation and looked at the river, he saw humanity. He saw babies, he saw old people, he saw suffering, he saw pain, he saw pleasure, he saw greed, he saw all of the human traits. He saw love, he saw hate, he saw anger, and it was all flowing by him in this river. And he said, that's it. That's the truth. It's all together. It's the river. It's not this injustice. It's not this pain. It's not this pleasure. It's the whole thing altogether. It's the oneness of it and the continuity of it. And that put him at peace. And that's what people say when they say they've cleared their minds. Peace. Peace is the experience. Peace. Peace. That's the number one thing that people seem to say when they've reached a very high level of clearing their mind of the stuff of society, the noise of society.
I guess you could call it that enlightened state by not focusing on one thing, so to speak. It's not just that driving force to be quote unquote successful or wealthy or happy or have what they want, or as you said before, always being right about everything, but it's accepting everything as a whole and knowing that all of these things are going to happen and will happen and do happen at all times, all connected. So really, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, acceptance, so to speak, it brings peace.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Jerry, that kind of brings me to a thought when you're saying that. I've always kind of thought that it seemed that people that were older, people that were elderly, always had this peace about them, that in a sense, and it almost kind of makes you wonder if it, as people get older, as humans reach an elderly age, they've seen it all, they've experienced it all, they've had, the pleasure, the pain, they've seen people die, they've seen all the good, all the bad. And it's almost like at that point, it's like you've accepted it. You went through it all, you understand it, and you're less focused on, when we're younger, we're focused on this job or this career or this car or this woman or this treasure that we're seeking, whatever it may be. And it's almost like everything else is an obstacle instead of being a part of your experience. It's just this thing is in my way, or this moment I don't like that doesn't fit my agenda or what I'm trying to do is just an obstacle. They're not realizing it's an experience and it's all part of everything. That this awful thing you're experiencing and this wonderful thing that you hope to achieve is all one. That's just really interesting. And I've always wondered if that's why as people get older, they seem to have the patience and a serenity about them that you don't really find that in younger people.
That's right. Yeah. Well, part of that is our society. We live in a society that doesn't encourage peace, inner peace. Not that we don't have it. I mean, people do have in our society,
right.
But it's a struggle. You have to really seek it out, and in our society, there are other societies. I think of tribal societies that where the members are brought up from early youth, knowing who they are. I don't think we in America are brought up knowing who we are.
No.
And many of us, do bizarre things most of our life, trying to seek out, who am I? Is a big question. But that's not true in all societies. But most of the Western societies have a similar sort of thing. But America is an extreme. I've traveled a lot, and I feel, as you have, and I feel like America is an extreme in that one respect, about having a lot of people confused about who they are.
And the altered perception of reality. It's really strange that, even just from when I was a teenager to teenagers today, we didn't have social media. Social media it's like this constant, you talked earlier about noise, trying to tune out society or tune out that noise. And I think people are immersed in the noise anymore. That seems to be all it is. It's, it's scrolling and swiping and who will like me today and who posted that and what is this and what is that. And there's a lot of noise, so finding clarity, I guess, in today's world would take a lot of discipline, I guess, depending on, culturally where you're from or what's happening.
It certainly would, and it certainly does. And I think the Buddha would look down and say on us, it's all good.
Yeah.
It's all good. It's all good.
Now, let me ask you this. So you decide that this calling is yours. You parapsychology, you became enamored with it. You literally went and knocked on the door of the research center.
Yeah.
From that point, when did you find yourself actually in these locations where people are reporting anomalous force and paranormal activity? What was that first case, so to speak, where you realized this is the real deal and I'm right in the middle of it?
When I went back to graduate school in psychology, and then a job came up at Duke, and I had been hanging around doing volunteer work and so forth, and they knew me, and so I just stepped right from my graduate school into the Psychical Research Foundation, as a full-time researcher there. And my interest at that time, when I did it, I thought I was going to do what Ryan did, do laboratory studies, laboratory research. But the guy who was in charge of the Psychical Research Foundation, who was very agreeable to doing lab research with me, and he also wanted to do together some research in our laboratory, with extrasensory perception and with things of that nature, particularly meditation. He was into meditation, and he wanted to find out how meditation affected one's psychic sensitivities. But it turned out differently because he had written a book called The Poltergeist. His name was William Roll, and he had gotten a bit of fame for that. So people called and were routed to our foundation, the Psychical Research Foundation, if they had a ghost or haunting or poltergeist or whatever anomalous activity or exceptional human experience of the haunting sort, then they would call us. And so I said, oh, that'd be kind of fun. I wonder what that's like. It's not what I was trained for. I'm not a field researcher, but gee, I'll go and have a look. And so that's how I get started. And probably the first one was I had a case in Boston. That was the first one I went to. And it was people who were reporting things that sounded like poltergeist because there were objects moving. And I had read Bill Roll's book, and Bill Roll gave me advice and suggestions on what I needed to do when I went up to Boston to investigate this case. As a matter of fact, I went with another colleague, Keith Harari, and we both sat down there were 3 people in the house, all adults. They had babies. They had 1 baby in the house, or 2, I'm not sure. I think the 2 women both had children, both had babies, infants. In any case, that's who was in the house. And it was the 3 adults, 1 man and 2 women, who were reporting what was going on. And so it was an eye-opening experience because we separated them in order so that they could speak freely. We didn't want them supporting one another in what's going on. We know what's going on. So I took the man in and first, and I sat down with him in a private room, and I started getting information from him about what was going on and why they called us. And so he started telling me about a few things that were happening, but he immediately said, but it's all her. It's all her. It's all because of her. She's doing all this, and she's doing it behind my back. And I really don't think we have a ghost. I think, she's trying to get us and blah, 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 blah. And so I said, oh, that's very interesting. Okay, all right. So the next step was then I interviewed one of the 2 women. And then when I did, sat down, got some basic information, what's going on, and immediately she jumped in and she said, I don't think we have a ghost. I think it's him. He's doing it all. He's trying to upset us. He's trying to affect our minds, and I think he wants me out of the house, and he's doing these things, and he's doing things with food, he's misplacing it and stuff like that. And I think it's, and so then Keith was interviewing the other woman, and after we left the house, Keith said, you know what? She said it was them too that were after her. So anyway, it turned out to be something very different that I was interested in, very different. But that was my first case. And later on, years later, I realized that that's part of it, kind of like the Buddha. So now, looking back, I can understand, I can say, well, yeah, that's what poltergeist is about. It's about tensions between people. And they were having tensions, they were having, anger, they were having, they were blaming one another. They weren't talking to each other, at least not saying the things they really meant.
Right.
And so they had a communication issue in the house. And who knows what other sexual energies were kind of going around there with 1 man and 2 women. They both had babies. I don't know if he was the father of them both. I could be. But
it's hard to say, but it sounds like a very, very interesting dynamic. And then
yes.
From what you're saying, all those mixed feelings, and with whatever situations you knew or didn't know about, all combusting in that house.
Yeah.
And then the anger, the resentment, jealousy, you're doing it, no, you're doing it, you want me out of here, all that energy you think could possibly be causing.
Yes.
And what type of activity were they experiencing? What was it that they were telling you was happening?
Things that were missing, that they would put things down, or that they had things like keys or jewelry, or I think there were food items that were kind of a constant source, that they would have some food items and they would disappear. And then they'd ask, "Did you see that? Did you see that?" And oh no, I didn't see that. And so it was small things like that. They didn't have big stuff. They didn't have furniture moving or anything like that at the point that we went there. Maybe they did afterwards. I don't know. But if I were to recycle and do that now, I would have looked at that very differently. I would have said, "Oh, there's something here that that might lead to poltergeist,"
I see.
But I didn't at that time. I was like, I had a naive point of view that I was going to go in and maybe see a few things, or at least collect reports about the events. I was focused on the events
and not the pattern.
Right.
I see. So that kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier. So
yes.
So that was one of your first case.
I believe that was the very first
one. When did you finally start investigating a case, or now you're physically in one of these locations, and you're witnessing something, or you're right in the throes of the phenomenon?
The first case like that was in a place called Reedsville, North Carolina. But what we were in the middle of, or what I was in the middle of, was it was a group home. It was a halfway house for people who had been in a retardation center, had grown up in a retardation center, but they were old enough and capable enough to live on their own, but they needed, for a period of time, a couple of years, to kind of live in what they call a halfway house, in a group home that was owned by this couple. And there were like 6 residents in there, in addition to the couple. And the couple had another home, but so they would kind of shuttle back and forth, but they would always be there for supervision purposes. They were like house mother, house father kinds of people.
I see.
In any case, they were getting a lot of reports from that the kids were seeing ghosts. They're having ghost experiences, and it was all visual stuff. So they were seeing things. I think there was some, I don't recall any, there was no object movements at all. But I think I recall that some of them felt like they heard sounds, but they were sounds that could be just the creaking of the stairs from old wood. They weren't anything like banging on the wall or anything like that, but just kind of really subtle house settling type sounds. But somehow, because they had seen what they thought were ghosts, they, kind of keyed on the sounds as well and wondered if that was part of it. So when I went in, I went in, I met with the people, and they gave their reports, but it was all subjective stuff, so we couldn't really do a whole lot with it, except I talked to the people involved, the house mother, house father. They were very nice people. So that started about a period of about 2 years. And during those 2 years, I got very heavily involved with that. I kind of put aside or did minimal work on the laboratory research that I was doing on my own and with Bill. I was also doing studies at Duke with another group with using EEG, and so that they kind of fit in with my interest in EEG with respect to poltergeist agents, because I was interested in EEG phenomena and collecting EEG as a measure of possible thought and consciousness, and so I had some studies like that going. But I put all that aside for about 2 years, And because we kept getting these calls, and I was eager to go and look at more. We even considered something that still could be done today. Maybe somebody's done it, I don't know. And that is to fund a van with a variety of equipment. And that van would have a couple of people who were on call, like firemen, and they would just go any place in the country where people would have a case, and we'd have a set of criteria. Does this have any scientific interest to it? There would be an emphasis on poltergeist. They're hard to come by, but you seem to have some success in coming across them, I think. Is that correct?
Let me ask you that question, because, we, as paranormal investigators, we hear that term quite frequently in today's world. Yeah. But, from learning what I've learned from you, and from really researching, and from William Roll's book and so many other things, I think that term poltergeist is used improperly, and it's used far too frequently. So from an expert, I would like to hear what do you define as a poltergeist?
Yeah, right. Okay. That's a very good question. So for me, the definition of poltergeist is pretty straightforward and easy, because I learned from the master. That's William Roll, who wrote the book, The Poltergeist. And when I call him a master, it's partly kind of a little joke in there, a little smile at it, because he would laugh at it and would not want to be called the master. But in fact, he is. He was a brilliant man, and he has some very creative ideas. And he kind of wrote that book. He was kind of forced into it. It wasn't his particular area of interest when he started off in parapsychology. In any case, the master was very clear that for him, a poltergeist case was one in which there were physical movements of objects, period. Okay. Now, turns out that there are a lot of cases of hauntings, which people call poltergeists for one reason or another. There are other definitions given. Some people think of, and this is in some published people, some people, who I know, some of my friends in parapsychology, think of poltergeist as being a person-oriented, whereas a haunting is house-oriented. My experiences don't match with that, so I don't think of it that way. So I take Bill Roll's definition. A poltergeist case is one in which there is physical movement. Now, the physical energy that's being expended has a big advantage, and that's what makes poltergeist so interesting from a scientific point of view. They are another level above haunting, apparition, ghost type stories in that they are observable. There's something observable that goes on. Now, you don't know what happened to make it observable, but it's at least there's something there. When somebody says, I've seen a ghost, or I have an apparition that I see, I can identify this lady that sits in my basement, that's their personal experience, and I have no idea whether they are really seeing something or not, and I never doubt anyone because I know too well that people have these experiences that are very real, but I can't verify that. So, and there's no scientific value in that because I can only interview and get some information, but it's all her word. So that's what makes poltergeist so interesting, and that's why he wrote the book Poltergeist. And he changed the terminology. He calls it RSPK, recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. So at the PRF, we always talked about RSPK cases. We always discussed RSPK. We never used poltergeist. Well, that's not true. We sometimes would use the word poltergeist, but in all of our publications, when we wrote about them or when people called and asked, we would encourage people to use the term RSPK. Reason? because it connects it to human beings.
I see. Okay.
RS, recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. Well, psychokinesis was being studied, PK, in the laboratory. And we knew humans had this ability. You know, if at times it varies from one human to another, but people can do this, can have an effect on the dice when they roll down the tray, even though they're not going to win the jackpot. But they do affect the roll of dice and other objects like that. We call it psychokinesis. So recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis makes the connection with humans. And that was also from Bill. Bill was adamant that in his cases, he never saw any substantial suggestion or evidence that there was spirit involved. In other words, we didn't need the idea of spirits or spiritism to explain what was going on.
So, I mean, I guess that being said, Mr. Roll must have had some type of data that would show that this was a human-based phenomenon. And I guess that's what you guys refer to as a
Yes.
poltergeist agent.
Yes.
And can you kind of explain what that term means?
Yes. Okay. So the poltergeist or RSPK case is, I first want to say that the scientific value is multiple here. First of all, you have the ability to measure things. That is, if a lamp falls off the table, I can measure how far it went. I can weigh the lamp. I can say how much energy it would take to do that in a normally. If there's a pounding on the side of a house, as there was in the case in Michigan, then I can assess how loud the pounding was, and I can make an estimate at how much energy it would take to reproduce that sound. And if there's a fire, I can also estimate. I can measure things. I can estimate how much energy it would take to make a fire like that. So this becomes science. The base of science is measurement. You can measure things. When you could actually take a ruler out or a scale or something and measure something, you are suddenly in science. Okay? So that's what lifts this into another prospect. But secondly, the RSPK type activity had patterns that showed up very early in the investigations of them. That is, the patterns of being in a family place. These things occur in homes. They don't occur in the local park. They don't occur in offices. They don't occur in schools. They don't occur, in the town hall. There have been rare exceptions to that, but the rule is it's almost perfect. Is that they always happen in family homes. Well, that's science, because that's an important thing. That tells you something. It tells you something that this is about the family. Okay. Next, it also, when we looked in, we find things that I found in my first case. Tensions amongst the people in that house. And we find that over and over and over and over again, and other researchers do, and they write their reports, and they say there was this tension in the family. So that's another thing, and that connects it even more to human beings. You say, well, gee, wait a minute. It's in a family home. It's a tense family home. Okay. And now we find that there's one person that the poltergeist or RSPK events favors certain people. It's not random. It favors certain people. There are certain people in the home who, number one, seem necessary for the events to occur. And when events occur, such as the movement of objects, the movement of the poundings, the knockings, the explosions, the fires, or whatever it is, when things happen, they happen to be the closest. So when we identify the people whose presence is necessary and seem to be closest to the events that are occurring in the house, then we call that person an agent. Very unfortunate. It's an unfortunate term. So I prefer to call him a focal person, focal to the events. Now, and again, time after time, when we make measurements of how far away each person who was present in the house was away and from the actual event. Okay, so where did the pounding come from? Well, the pounding come from that wall over there. Okay, well, who else was in the house? How far away were you from that wall? And how far away were you? And so you collect data like that. It's painstaking, but that's science. So you're measuring things. So you measure the next event and the next event, the next event, and you put them all together and you say, oh, look, person A was the closest to all those events. Whenever the event, they were always there, and they were always present in the house when it happened. Sometimes we found pairs of persons in the Bridgeport case, for example, when we did that same thing. We measured the house, we laid out maps and charts, and we said, every event, where were you and how far away, we measured. And we found that the mother and the daughter were together, the kind of pair of agents that were there. We thought that might have been an artifact, but we didn't eliminate the idea that the mother-daughter was the center of the dysfunction of the family. Another part of the pattern is that when you find the agent, we find that the fact that there is a person who's preferred by the RSPK activity, then that's of interest scientifically. That actually adds another human dimension to it, connects it more to human beings. Plus, it also gives you another avenue for doing science. You can now focus your attention and say, hey, who is this person? Is this person special in any way? Why are they the center of this? Why are they the focal person? Was there something that how are they different from the other people in the house, and how are they related to the other people in the house, and how are they related to people on the street who are not part of this family, et cetera, et cetera. So that becomes another avenue for investigation. And as we investigate this, we find patterns over and over and over like this. In some cases, there have been agents. Most agents are female around puberty age. The majority are, but there's an abundance of adolescent male as well in this mix. But we also have agents from time to time who are infants.
Wow, infants.
Yes. Infants, yes. Yes, where the center of activity seems to center on the infant, and also there are some elderly people in their 70s who have turned up. That's rare. Both of those extremes are rare, but they do happen from time to time, So
let me ask you this: do you think that, from your experience and your research, a poltergeist agent, obviously the activity seems to center around them for whatever reason, but do you think that they are the cause of the activity, or do you think it takes the agent's dynamic with the other people in the home to create the disturbance, so to speak?
Excellent question. One of the first things that happens in many cases where detectives or police get involved, or sometimes a priest or a medical person will come in, and they will immediately kind of look for cause effect and look at the agent who's usually obvious. It's usually obvious even before a full investigation is made. People in the family have realized that, this one here is always closest to the activity, and when he goes away, it doesn't happen anymore. It's pretty obvious. So, but when the police agency comes in, which they often do, we have the answer. They're doing it, Now, that's just one step away from a Ghostbuster, for example, who might say, well, the spirits around him are doing it, Both are wrong. To assert causality to the agent herself or himself. In other words, but it's going back to how the mind works. I mean, you see something move, there's nobody around, or you hear a bang on the wall, nobody around. Well, somebody made that, Well, somebody moved that, but there's no somebody. Well, the mind creates a somebody, an invisible somebody. We call them ghosts. We create that. Now, this does not say that ghosts don't exist. I would never say that. I would. So many people mistake me for being a skeptic, and I laugh. I'm not a skeptic. I'm one of the most open guys you've seen.
I see what you're saying. So there certainly is obviously instances where people are experiencing a haunting, where they're dealing with a ghost or some type of entity, spirit, but in some cases you believe that they are experiencing paranormal activity, or at least anomalous, which would be paranormal by definition, but their mind is trying to put two and two together. This object moved, therefore I saw something. I saw something white or translucent or something blurry, because their mind's trying to understand how that could have happened.
Excellent way of putting it. Excellent. That's you put it perfectly. Yeah. So that's what's happening in my mind. So I say to the question, is the agent the cause? I say, well, no, there could be lots of other causes. So we shouldn't leap to those ideas that, well, one of the theories that's been pandied around in parapsychology is that somehow the brain waves of the agent in an RSPK case are somehow, getting out of the brain, exploding out like an epileptic seizure, and exploding out of the brain and affecting the area around him. I don't think that makes sense. That doesn't make sense. That's got too many holes in it. That's not a good theory. There are problems with that. But we shouldn't leap to conclusions because there are other possibilities. Well, people will say, well, what other possibilities? Well, I say, look at Nina Kalagina. Well, Nina Kalagina was moving objects with her mind. Nina Kalagina is an example of people doing PK in a laboratory. So people can do PK unconsciously. And there's also the possibility, just one idea I'm throwing out, okay? Not that I believe it or not that it's a good idea, but just one possibility. Another possibility is that the family energies of the group are somehow being used in the movement of the objects.
So it's the dynamic of everyone together.
That's right.
And that's pretty fascinating because, as you said, it's been proven that people have had that form of physical telekinesis willingly, that they have that ability to move something. But then again, how many people can possess that ability and not even are aware that they're doing it? Right. Basically, like we talked about, people having an out-of-body experience, maybe while they're asleep or while they're just kind of sitting there and they kind of daze out and this happens, but they're not intending to.
That's right.
And might not even be aware that they ever did.
Much of human experience, my experience and your experience and each person's experience, is unconscious.